Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. Let's get right on into it. All right, folks, ESPN has joined the lawsuit, ACC versus FSU, and it's getting ugly.
Now Kane.
Yeah, this is turning into a nasty little deal. The ACC and the FSU, it's only a matter of time before those two part. This is like a really bad marriage where everybody's like, okay, these two don't need to be together anymore. And it's understandable. Lots happened, and we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about ESPN. But first, we had a monumental thing happen last week, which was Friday, when Judge Corker up in Greenville, Tennessee, sided with the Vols with their preliminary restraining order against the NCAA all the way through the trial to the end of it. We also know that Judge Corker, federal judge at the Eastern District, made it clear that the NCAA is not going to win that case. It's NIL related, obviously, has to do with Nico and a plane ride from California. I guess he was supposed to hitchhike. But yeah, last Friday, the Vols delivered a blow to the NCAA.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home. Yeah, they blew up the Death Star. So this affects FSU as well and every team in the country, because here's why. Now, NIL rules and all that, which they weren't really rules, according to the NCAA president.
Right now, there are no rules around how name, image, and likeness works. And for your audience, that's the opportunity for student athletes to benefit from their name, image, and likeness.
Of course, they'll tell you there's rules, but you can believe them or you can believe your lying eyes. It's up to you. I just showed you the video clip. But anyway, now NIL rules have been pretty much neutralized all the way through to the end of this case. So whatever happens, happens. So pretty much the NCAA is not going to be able to stick their nose into NIL deals and all that. They're just going to have to leave it alone. And again, FSU just got nailed over something stupid. A coach drove a kid to an NIL meeting. Had he called an Uber, I guess it wouldn't have been a problem, but he drove him there. He wasn't in the meeting. They gave him a 2-year show cause over that. And you lost 5 scholarships. That's stupid. They ought to be able to reopen that given the circumstances. And I would think if the judge sides with Tennessee, that finding should be null and void immediately. There should be 5 scholarships given back to FSU, and that coach should not have a 2-year show cause put on him. I don't care if they did agree or not, because at the time, that was really against the law what the NCAA was doing to FSU. But anyway, let's get into this ESPN deal, because now they've joined the lawsuit. And there's even talk that there could be potential felony charges for disclosing trade secrets. And that's why ESPN joined in. And ESPN has joined the side of the ACC with a blistering legal filing in support of the conference's efforts to keep details of the network's media deal with the conference under seal. And you can't blame them. They got a sweetheart deal. They're not having to pay the ACC very much at all. They've also got a huge extension in there. They can go through 2036. So you can understand why FSU is not happy. They're stuck in there for 13 years, getting a paltry amount of money, while all the other teams that they compete against, especially in the SEC and Big Ten, are going to get twice as much money. And it's only going to get worse as time goes by, because the SEC and the Big Ten, they didn't sign long-term contracts. They signed medium-term contracts that are huge. So Florida State sees that they're getting left behind, and they want to compete at the highest level. They're not happy just, being in the middle. That's not going to satisfy FSU fans at all. Nor should it. FSU's, they've had a lot of success in football. It says the albatross that is the ESPN ACC contract is seen as a centerpiece, and why Florida State is trying to exit, like we just discussed. And what they're trying to do, ESPN wants to keep the details of their media deal under seal. And what ESPN's lawyers have said, and this is their words, says the terms of ESPN's agreements are textbook trade secrets. Says publicly disclosing the terms of an ESPN agreement with a prominent rights holder would be destabilizing and harmful for them. Competing networks would gain a leg up on ESPN in the next round of negotiations with right holders, and all other rights holders negotiating with ESPN would capitalize on the knowledge of what specific terms ESPN has agreed to. Yeah, it would help the other conferences for sure. When they know what is getting paid, they can ask for more. So I understand ESPN not wanting that out there, but you've got to remember Florida has a sunshine law, and that's where they want to put sunshine on all these types of contracts. And of course, FSU has filed in Florida, whereas the ACC ran and got one day ahead of them and filed a suit against them in North Carolina, where they feel like they would have a better outcome possibly. So there's a lot of politics in this. And it says ESPN lawyers seem to casually float an accusation that Florida State may or may not have committed a felony in disclosing some of this information already. ESPN argues that their trade secret should remain secret, whether in North Carolina or Florida, as we discussed. It says whether FSU and its lawyers have committed a felony by knowingly disclosing ESPN's trade secrets is a question for another day. So there is no question that trade secrets are carefully guarded throughout the United States, including in Florida, ESPN argues. So the definition of a trade secret under Florida law is substantially similar to that of North Carolina. That'll be argued. I promise you that. And here's the actual suit. Here's the paperwork. Memorandum of law in support of the plaintiff's amended motion to seal. And that's ESPN, obviously. And they did that in North Carolina. And here they call themselves the worldwide leader in sports thanks to its unparalleled live sports broadcasting business. ESPN Live broadcasts are made possible, blah, 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 blah. It says ESPN's agreements are carefully negotiated and closely safeguarded, et cetera. And it goes through all of that in this amendment. I'm not going to read that to you and bore you to death.
Thanks.
Because it does get boring. But this thing's getting ugly. Now, I've heard a lot of people on YouTube and in the news talking about a settlement. Now, if this goes into discovery, that's when it can get real interesting because there's accusations of nepotism in this and some other things that a lot of people probably don't want coming out. So Florida State's like, hey, let's get this into court. And the ACC and ESPN are like, hey, we got trade secrets here. We don't want this getting out. And if they go to court, there's a good chance that would happen. So they're obviously trying to keep that from occurring. And they're probably trying to scare FSU with this felony talk, which, I mean, who are you going to charge with? Give me a break. So I think that's just a red herring, really. But, you know, hey, making a threat's making a threat. Now, the numbers that have been thrown around, instead of this 520 or 540 million, which is what people have determined will have to be paid because of the grant of rights and the penalty to walk out, which is 120 million plus over 400 million for the grant of rights, which is a ridiculous penalty. There's people talking about a $300 million settlement. If I was FSU, there's no way I would pay that amount of money. I would say, hey, let's take this thing into court. Let's get into discovery and see if we can negotiate this thing down below 100 million. I would not want to pay them 300 million. There's no way. And you got to realize too, the ACC played a major role in them not getting in the college football playoff this year because of the alliance. That's where ACC, Big 12, and I believe the Big 10 all got together and formed an alliance against the SEC to keep the 12 teams from coming in 1 year earlier. Had it come in like it was supposed to this last year, they would have been in the playoff. Obviously, it wouldn't have mattered. But they got kicked out of the top four. Even though they were ranked fourth, they were undefeated, 13-0, had won their conference championship. Because they had lost their quarterback 2 weeks earlier, they got kicked out of the college football playoff, and Alabama slid in. And they wound up with the toughest bout they could have. They had to play Georgia. And, of course, all of FSU's best players opted out because they were ticked off. They weren't in the playoff. So they just said, we're going to sit out. So Florida State went out there with their entire second string. Georgia showed up with their entire first string because that's Georgia, man. They're just good at keeping their players motivated. Even though they should have been ticked off, they weren't in there too. And it was just a bloodbath. It was terrible. I think they beat them 63-3 or something, and it wound up just being awful. And even Kirby Smart came out and said, this can't happen. We cannot have bowl games like this where the entire second string's playing a first string team. It's just not going to work. And if Kirby Smart talked about it, that tells you how bad it was. And it was really unfortunate because it made FSU look bad when they had a very good team. Had all their players been out there, it would have been a very different outcome. Now, I'm not saying they would have beat Georgia, but it would have been competitive. So we'll be keeping an eye on this thing. It's getting ugly, and I think it's going to get uglier before finally there's a settlement. Dalton, tell them.
It'll get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, going to get worse before it gets better.
Roadhouse.
It may take several months, but it sounds like it's only getting uglier, and ESPN sticking their nose in there. And look, ESPN, the SEC is what they're worried about. They just don't want their little secrets out on what's a pretty cushy deal for them. They're going to make money on the ACC all the way through 2036, so they don't want that getting out there, that they've got a sweetheart deal. But they're more concerned about their deal with the SEC right now than they are anything else. But they shouldn't want to tick off FSU
because they're going to have to decide, are they going to go to the Big Ten or SEC when they get out? And if you're ESPN, you want them to go to the SEC. That's better for you. Because the thing about Florida State is, that's a heck of a program. They're not some schmuck. They are a top 10 program pretty easily, typically on average. And last year, of course, they were. So anyway, we'll keep tabs on this, but this thing's getting dicey. And if you've not subscribed, it's on your right, my left. Just hit this little button. I'd appreciate it. Costs you nothing, helps me out. And right over here's the most recent video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy based on your viewing history. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.